I've been up since 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So if I do hit the floor, just go on with your business. I will wake up eventually. But it's a pleasure to be here in Texas. I was here in January and the weather was 40 degrees and now it's 50. So you made a big jump in temperature, which is always nice to see. And really my goal today is try to answer whatever questions you might have about teaching and learning, because I know you'll have issues. And at least what I've discovered by giving these talks is we all have the same issues. We all try to solve them independently of each other, which is a complete waste of everybody's time. But I found no better way to get everybody together to kind of talk about problems. So at least here at the same university, you can solve each other's problems and you guys have enough experience and knowledge to kind of do this. So I think I have to start this thingy or share my screen. Sharing options, share screen. Technology. Go away. So in case you ever need to contact me, that is my email address. I am the associate editor for the American Journal of Pharmaceutical Education. So probably the premier pharmacy education journal. There's only 2 of them, so 1 of 2 is not too bad. So, because pharmacy, like a lot of health professions, medicine, nursing, there's a lot of scholarship of teaching, how we educate each other about what's going on. So if you are interested in scholarship of teaching, we can talk about that as well as how to actually research in your classroom and make that known to other people. Email address, and then if you're on Twitter, you can be like my 2nd and 3rd followers after like the dog and my dad. And for me, Twitter started because I get table of contents sent to me via email, and every week I go read them, and Twitter was a way for me to process them differently than just reading them. So I had to do something tangible with it and make it 140 words or 140 characters to put out there for the world to say, hey, here's some research on cognitive psychology about how we can teach better. So a lot of stuff that I read is cognitive psychology, educational psychology, to try to apply it to education in classrooms. So the people that I collaborate with for research-wise, kind of the same things. In July, I am set to go on sabbatical to actually go and do more psychology-like things and how to translate it to the classroom. So a lot of stuff I'll talk about today is the underpinnings of why things work and how we can do more of that inside a classroom situation, online, in person, experiential-wise. So the first is for you to kind of think about if you were to leave today with one problem solved, what will be that one problem? So if you have a piece of paper in front of you or you have a really good memory, jot down that problem. I'll ask the group for some of your responses. I'll try to write it on these beautiful whiteboards. Hopefully they're whiteboards and not the wall. And then we can see what issues we can talk about today and maybe solve a few of them along the way. So take a few minutes, think about one problem you'd like to solve today, and we'll get back together and collect some of those ideas. So does anybody have a problem they want to share with the audience? Things that you would like, yes, ma'am.
So this is obviously specific to our program.
Yep.
But our inaugural class is about 70 students.
Okay.
And when I'm teaching PBL in that class, it's for me a much more rewarding, engaging, rich environment. Our subsequent classes are a little over 100 students. To me, there's a drastic difference. Trying to facilitate and have meaningful experiences with a class of 100 versus 70. So maybe just some tactics on how to engage
Large classes.
larger classes.
Okay. So to put my experience in context, at UNC Chapel Hill School of Pharmacy, we have about 150 students. We have a satellite campus, so we have 125 in Chapel Hill. We have 25 to 30 in Asheville, so everything is live video conference. So what you see today is what I do on a regular basis. And we're in a case study like room where there's kind of levels, but at least it's not as bad as a lecture style classroom. So I'm used to teaching large classes. Of course, my colleagues across campus teach in 400-person classrooms. So we can definitely talk about how to do that. It's feasible, not necessarily easy or fun sometimes, but definitely possible. Yep.
So I'd like to learn how to make a meaningful assessment because no matter how I try to give a meaningful comment or feedback to their test result or writing, they take, students into take it personally. I do have a hard time also. I want to learn if there's any meaningful assessment that students okay and they understand what the takeaway lessons should be.
So how to make assessments less personal for them, that you're trying to give them feedback on how to get better versus saying you're a terrible person altogether.
So, if they get an award or they think I hate them.
Yes. So yeah, so we can talk about that as well. Okay, so how not to make students hate us for getting low grades. Other things. Yep.
Going off of assessment as well, how to improve literacy and reliability.
Okay, if we use Scantrons or fancy software, we get all this output about difficulty and discrimination and how do we make better questions and what all that stuff mean. We can talk about that as well. Oh. So no one relates to that because, so student preparation. About 3 years ago, our School of Pharmacy decided to trash the old curriculum and make a brand new curriculum where the basis is engaged classrooms. So by default, having students prepare before class is necessity now. Easier to do when one class does it. When 5 classes do it in the course of the semester, things get much more challenging. So we can talk about some of the experiences and things that seem to work for us. Other things. Okay, so we give students lots of homework or tests and they're like, oh, this is just another hoop to jump through. It doesn't really apply to what I'm going to do in real life. So how do we make them see those connections for us, especially if you're more on a professional program side of things? It's really important for the basic side of things of how does it apply to their regular life. Yep.
How do we successfully integrate? We started out with this fully integrated, and we're now going into a silo integration. I guess we call it, I don't know, we've used the name 500 times. But how do we successfully integrate in the classroom and on campus? If that makes sense.
It does. Because every place has the same problem. We start off the first year really great because faculty talk to each other. The next day, like, oh, last year worked fine. Let's just stop talking to each other. 3 years later, you're back to your silos. Yeah. Yep.
And I built all this interactive stuff, like sharing your food, sharing the robot tools. And I have these people who wait like 30 minutes, 5 minutes too, on Sunday night to start building, start putting their food together. It doesn't matter what class I teach, all of these are clear things that you can wait until the night. And then you know, cram and learn.
Okay, so how to get students actually to be aware of how long it takes to actually do something and plan ahead versus waiting to the last minute. Like, not that we do as faculty, because we're always ahead of schedule. Especially this time of year when finals are just around the corner, where I'm sure it's all written and ready to go.
Yeah, I guess my question was,
Mhm.
how to do not only successful, really large. By online, I mean, no grading, discussion.
But you want to grade student participation and or group functionality.
I just want to make sure that we're learning how to
Mhm.
that they're not, I guess, piggybacking somebody else.
Okay. So how to make sure they're not piggybacking to each other, they're actually learning something and holding them accountable for that without having 300 people to track on a discussion board, because that gets out of hand pretty quick. Unless you have lots of TAs. Oh, no, we're perfect. And when you're a new faculty member, it's a little easier because you're still new, you're learning, but after a few years experience, you're like, oh, I've done this class 15 times. It's easy for me to teach it. This stuff makes sense to me. And the students are like, what are you talking about? It's a completely different language you're talking to me. I teach pharmacokinetics. It's math. It's a different language. Pharmacy in general is a different language with medical terminology. So the learning curve to get the language down is one of the biggest hurdles for at least me in getting them past their former math phobias, even though it's not really high level math. Any other ones?
Any ideas on how to improve etiquette? Most of those things.
Okay, so just realize we only have like 50 minutes. So we can address some of these pretty quick. Well, not very quickly, but we'll try to do our best. Is there any last dying ones you want out there?
Sorry, I already have one. We just recently implemented Turning Point.
Okay.
So basically, how to use Turning Point good and not useful. I feel like it allows students to be anonymous and kind of give us the sense that they're participating, but potentially get away from that creep with the classroom because they can't just kind of sit back and their phone.
So Turning Point being a audience response system, clickers, where you can put up multiple choice questions or fill in the blank and they can text in or respond anonymously or non-anonymously, depending how you set it up. Is that it? Do I cover all the bases? Okay. So we have a few questions to answer here. So I'll try to address some of these with some of the background knowledge and some of the other things we'll talk about. And again, these are really difficult questions. I would love to come in and say, if you do this, your life will be perfect. There's no such answer. If there was, I'd write a book and be a very rich person. Or at least semi-rich, because no one actually reads books anymore, but we'll get to that as well. See comment number, student preparation. So the first thing to realize is forgetting happens very quickly. So Ebbinghaus back in the 1800s, first person generated a forgetting curve. He made himself memorize nonsensible syllables and measured how often he can recall them over time. So very quickly after he learned stuff, it drops and then it plateaus. So when your students leave class, they're gonna like, oh, I understood that. It was a really good lecture. The next day, they probably have no idea what happened the prior day. It's sad. If you really want to make yourself sad, give your students an exam on the previous semester's material and see how much they don't remember. We do that a lot now from a research perspective of how much students remember from certain classroom interventions. And this has been repeated over and over again, different contexts. So forgetting happens very quickly. So our goal is kind of like slow this forgetting process. It's going to happen, but we can do things in the classroom to hopefully slow down this process from a class perspective and as a curriculum perspective. So a couple of objectives, so just two, and that is describe some of the evidence out there and some best practices from that evidence and reflect whether your assessments are appropriate, inappropriate, or how can we make them better. So we have to start with what is learning. So I tend to use this definition of learning. I'll give you a couple seconds to read this definition. So I have this slide up here for two reasons. One, just from an instructional standpoint, if you have a text-heavy slide, your audience will try to read it. If you talk while they're trying to read it, you're dividing attention and they're going to learn less. So one, don't have a text-heavy slide, have other things up there. Two, let them read it and get it done with, or just read off the slide, which people love when you do that. But there are certain things here. One is retention. We want students to remember stuff after the class is over. So when you're thinking about like your learning objectives for your course, think about, okay, a year from now, if I saw this student in the parking lot and I asked them questions about the course, what should they definitely remember about that course? And I think about terms in long term, 1 year after, to really help you focus on the really big concepts, because we cut up in the details. Our students equate exams to how many slides you have to memorize. And if they know the instructor, they know exactly what question or what slide they're going to ask. Oh, it's be the 76th slide, that little point in the bottom right-hand corner, which is not the way assessment and learning should go. The second part is transfer, which is a much harder process. Can you take what we do in this class, this way of thinking, this content, and put it in a slightly different situation? Can you solve the same problem? That's a really hard thing for people to do, especially novices. We think it's easy. Oh, they know this, but they can't make that transfer. And there's things we can do to help with some of this stuff as well. So it's about acquiring new knowledge, retrieving it when necessary to avoid that tip of the tongue state. So in healthcare, it's really important. If a pharmacist is on a rounding team and a physician asks them a question and they can't retrieve the information when it's needed, it's as well as if they never learned it to begin with. They're not useful to that team at that point. So how do we keep information not only stored well, but retrievable? And then applying it to a future problem. We have to do something with the information. We have to apply it to a situation to really to have it stay in memory. So I come from healthcare. We love guidelines. We have guidelines for everything: cough, cold, cancer therapy. So I decided to make my own guidelines. This is the best thing I can come up with as far as names. We all like our acronyms as well. So before I went to like copyright this word and make millions off my GREEP, I did a quick Wikipedia search, and there is a thing called a GREEP. It's a terrifying enemy with two giant sickles combining horrific qualities with precious imagery that gives it a conflicted disposition of creepiness and cuteness. Like, well, if that doesn't describe me, then what doesn't? So creepiness and cute. So in the handout, I have these recommendations there with some references and some material of where that came from. So I'm gonna go through some of these pretty quickly to kind of give you a big overview. One is the goal, high but achievable goals. If they are too high, If they are too far out of reach of the student, they give up and stop trying. If it's too easy, why should I bother? And they stop trying. This is probably one of the hardest things, especially when you get to large classrooms, especially when you deal with maybe large fractions of students that have different high school backgrounds, different college backgrounds, first-time generation students, underrepresented minorities who have all different sorts of backgrounds. Finding high but achievable goals for each one of those students is really hard. So this is where your course objectives come into play. This is where your class objectives come into play of what is high but achievable for all the students and how do we help them get there. So step one in designing a course, learning objectives. Step two is the assessments. How do you know they got there? How do you know they're making progress to it? And step three is the activities that help them get there. So the learning objective thing was new for a lot of our faculty. So a few years ago, my colleague and I designed this little cute slide chart of Bloom's taxonomy. It has outcome verbs, assessment questions, and then instructional strategies to go along with it. So if you wanted to know what are verbs for understanding, you pull a little thing down, you read them off, and you can do it. So my friend and I, this was a really stupid idea. I had it in the shower where all stupid ideas occur, and we did it, and people seemed like, oh, this is really smart. You guys should sell it. We're like, who's gonna buy this? Well, apparently some people do. So I can give you a place where you can go purchase them if you really want them for yourself or for students or for trainees. So high but achievable goals. Second, and this is more personal bias, that 1 month after your course is over, students should remember at least 60% of the major concepts. Why 60%? Why not? This comes from some of our research. So in the world of pharmacy, students have to learn brand generics. What's the brand name? What's your generic name? One generic name can have multiple brand names. In our curriculum, it's a self-paced course. It's simply memorization. We don't need to spend course time doing it. We can do it online. And we're doing interventions to see, can we make them learn more by spacing out their practice? And students will get a 97 at the end of the semester on the final exam. 6 weeks later, they walk in the first day of class for the next class. We give them an exam. They laugh because they know nothing. And it goes from 40% to the 60s. Now, a lot of our classes are giving exams first day of class to see where they remember from previous classes. And again, 60, 70% is kind of where the average is of where students are kind of remembering the major concepts. Assessments that provide students feedback without hurting their grade. So students need data. When we have things like time mismanagement, they don't know how long it takes to do an assessment because they have no data to inform their opinion. Or they walk into the exam and they think, I got this exam, and they fail it because they don't have enough data to know where they stand and how they should study. So how can you build assessments that get them data to make better decisions? Without feedback, we don't learn very much. So while 3 is for students, 4 is, how about instructors? What can you do that's low stakes that will not hurt them for learning, because learning is a process. We don't want to hurt them for learning and struggling. We've all learned better by failing than we do success. So how do you get students to fail and be okay with it without hurting their grade in the process? Because they're trying to learn these things too. So we can talk about meaningful assessments for them. And then if you're making decisions, all those assessments, if you're going to kick someone out of your program for failing your course, you better make sure that assessment is actually measuring what you think it's measuring, because there's going to be a lawsuit. Students don't want to be kicked out of school. It's very expensive for them, especially professional schools. So assessments become much more important when you start dealing with the higher risk sorts of things. Instructional activities focus around main concepts and application centered. Early on, when people are flipping classes, doing active learning, they're doing activities that aren't major concepts. It's little detail stuff, which is great maybe for upperclassmen, but they need to work on practicing major concepts. So what are the major concepts of your classes? What can you do to help them practice and use these sort of concepts? Assessment should be aligned with content and objectives. This is what we call instructional alignment. If you have a course objective of, we want to develop critical thinkers, in your assessments you think are critical thinking assessments and you lecture, that's a misalignment. Lecture does not develop critical thinking. You have to make sure all those are aligned. Otherwise, what you're measuring is a bit haphazard. Again, transfer. Students aren't going to automatically apply stuff because they know the basic content. Activities should be diverse. When we talk about transfer of learning, here's how memory works. If you learn something, you learn it in context the way it's learned, and you retrieve it, you recall it based on that context. And I'll show you some data about that a little bit later. So the only way they're really going to get to retrieve that information is you give them the same context to retrieve that information. If you want them to generalize that or transfer it, you have to give them lots of different examples so they see the same thing from different perspectives. In pharmacy and nursing, it's a little bit easier because it's a curriculum focused on healthcare. So we can talk about a drug from a therapy standpoint, from a pharmacology standpoint, from a med chem standpoint, and they see different connections to the same drug. Learning is also not one and done. How many courses, like we talk about this topic, we're never going to go back to it ever again in the semester or in that curriculum. Learning doesn't work by a one and done unless that one instance is very emotional. Think about the happiest moment in your life. Graduation, marriage, kid, divorce, whatever the happiest moment was. You don't need to study it. That emotional context really helps to solidify it. It's survival. If something's emotional, it means, okay, this is important to us. We should really remember this. A lot of stuff we do in the classroom has no emotional component to it, so we don't remember it as well. But stories get remembered really well. First day, fall semester. I have a class of 150 students. I tell them of all the schools I went to, Purdue, Florida, UMass, North Carolina, if any of them win a national championship in a major sport that year, I will buy them dinner. With the exception of UNC women's soccer, because they won it like for 13 straight years. It's like, they don't count. March. So now 9 months later, University of Florida out of nowhere wins the national championship in basketball. I walk in the class and a student goes, didn't you make a bet with us the first day of class where you buy us all dinner? And I'm like, you don't remember anything I actually taught you, but you remember the bet I made the first day of class 9 months ago. So they remember things that you probably never intended to remember. So that's when I started cooking lunch for them for 150 people for about 10 years. And then I realized that this is a very expensive proposition. And the curriculum changed, so that was my excuse to stop doing that. But they do remember stuff even though they probably never intended to actually learn that. Students should retrieve information from memory. Students don't like it, it's difficult, but it reinforces learning and helps things become retrievable. And I'll show you some data on this as well. And the last one, course environment should be positive and inclusive. I went to a talk at Duke earlier this week. So yes, it's our rival university. I really shouldn't go 8 miles to Duke, but I did because there are some smart people there. And the students were doing a study on the impact of sending an email the first day of class and the tone of that email being much more feminine or being much more masculine. And the issues of social identity. And what the research says is if you send a friendly email that first day, welcome to the class, and showing that you're excited about it, students do better. They're more likely to ask for help. They're more likely to be engaged in that class. If students know you are there to help them, they're more likely to do things which they may not do for other people who think they're out there to fail them. And I tell the students the first day of class now, it is me and them versus the content. Because as a faculty member, we have a natural conflict of interest here. Our goal is to help them learn this material. That's our goal. At the same time, we have to be sort of a gatekeeper and make sure that they actually learn it to a viable degree. So it's a conflict of interest. As a faculty developer, I refuse to do some of the evaluations of teaching, because if I help someone become a better teacher, but they're still terrible, I can't tell them you're terrible because like, well, I went to you for a year and you did nothing for me. I'm like, no, I helped you a lot, but you're still terrible. So it's a conflict of interest. It's much easier to have someone else assess them on their teaching than me being both teacher and assessor. So positive and inclusive environments. So my top 10 tips. Question. Yep. By Guido Sarducci. Yep. So if you are old enough, you might remember a Saturday Night Live skit by Guido Sarducci called The 5-Minute University. And he says, the university, 5-Minute University should be based off of things you remember 5 years after graduation. Language. Speak Spanish. ¿Cómo está usted? The answer is muy bien. If you take 3 years of Spanish in college, that's the only things you remember. Economics, supply and demand. Buy things cheap, sell them for more money. So at the end of 4 years of college, remember the really big picture stuff. And that was the basis of his little comedic sketch. So it is true that you remember the bigger picture, things that are most important to you, things that are most relevant to you. You forget the details. So that's why the 60% is, yeah, you're not gonna remember 100%, but it's 60% that's really big picture stuff. So if I walk in and I see you walking across the street and Tom Angelo, my colleague, calls this the parking lot test. If you see someone in a parking lot and you ask them 30 seconds, tell me what you learned in the class, they can give you a reasonable thing of what they learned in that class. So yeah, so I think that 5-Minute University is true for the most part. Spanish, I remember cerveza and como está usted, and donde está el cuarto de baño. You know, the big things in life. The other languages that I know are all curses. Why? I don't know, but it seems to be the things that, you know, from Thai to German to everything else, I can curse. I just can't ask for like reasonable things. Because that's important for us. You know, we're forced to take a language, we don't understand the purpose of it. So we take it to jump through the hoop of undergraduate education to only realize that, oh yeah, years later, I really wish I paid more attention to Spanish class. I really wish I continued playing an instrument and feeling I was forced to do it. So how do we make it relevant enough to make sure they are remembering this stuff? So yeah, so it is a conflict of what we normally tend to remember. And this is why we stay in school forever, to relearn stuff we once remembered at some point. So go to YouTube, watch it, it's fantastic. Sometimes I show it, sometimes I don't. So top 10 tips. So the first 5 are things that don't require a whole bunch of discussion. At least I don't think they do. Forgetting happens fast. Active learning prevents that decay or slows it down, period. We don't need to show active learning works anymore. And I'll put an asterisk by that. The research shows it's lecture versus lecture with active learning. People misinterpret this and saying active learning means they have to be active for the entire class period. It's not what the research says. One of the classic papers that came out probably a few years ago in Science puts their professor versus the postdoc. Postdoc was taking a teaching and learning class. Professor, 15, 20 years of experience teaching physics, head-to-head comparison. What students learn better? Professor lectures. The postdoc had some pre-reading, had some clicker questions, some quiz things. So a lecture with some active learning things to reinforce stuff. Postdoc blew him out of the water. Effect size of 2, so 2 times, almost 2 times better. So 1, never show up your PI. It's probably never a good thing to do. But doing little things can make a big difference. Not talking for 50 minutes, having little lecture breaks and activities is a really good stimulus. You don't have to do 100% flip all the time to get the same results. And if you've never done active learning in the classroom, please don't flip your classroom the next semester. If you go from lecture now to a flipped classroom one semester, bad things are going to happen. I've seen it, it's not pretty. If you are going to start doing active learning, start with topics you know the best. And I say this because when you're in front of a group of 10 students to 100 to 200 students, you're going to get questions you're not prepared for. And it's frightening to be in front of a group of people, even if we are faculty and used to doing this. So it's easier when you're more comfortable with material to think on your feet. It took me a lot of years to stop over planning every detail of class and get used to that I actually know something and think on my feet. So start with stuff you're really comfortable with. And some of us teach outside of our area of expertise, so it's really harder to do that. But once you get comfortable with stuff, you kind of learn to facilitate, and you don't have to be the content expert all the time. The 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle, little things make a big difference. Change 20% of your class, 80% change. Start with bigger picture stuff. Do you have learning objectives? Do you have good exams? Are you doing little active learning things? Don't go for little detail stuff because you can get a bigger impact by doing smaller things that are more impactful. And I'll show you some guidelines on what is more impactful. Attitude matters, especially if you're trying to convince other people's minds. If you don't believe active learning works or flipped classroom is right for you, please don't do it. Until your attitude changes, you're gonna meet your own expectations. It's gonna fail. You're like, see, I told you it doesn't work. So you're gonna have to believe that it's gonna have some impact. Try 3 times. I've seen faculty try it once. Oh, that didn't work. Going back to lecture, going back to what I did before because it didn't work. Nothing works the first time, works pretty well. Second time it works better. Third time, if it doesn't work by the third time, then maybe it's like, okay, try something else. For a while there, I was developing games in class. It's a fun alternative. It's a lot of time and effort to develop a good game. After a while, I got bored doing it. It didn't have the impact I was looking for, so I stopped doing games. And if you're science, students in science don't tend to like games. They're quite serious people. Physicists don't like games unless they're like blowing stuff up or catapulting something. So professional students kind of the same way. Pharmacy students are like, we like games as an alternative, but it's not our favorite thing. And students don't need to know the name of stuff. So we found this out the hard way to some degree. Person comes in and is like, this course is a flipped classroom thing. We're gonna do a think, pair, share. We're gonna do some concept mapping. And if they have a bad experience, the next class they get to is like, oh, this is a flipped classroom. This is gonna be a disaster because the last class was a disaster as well. Students don't care what things are called. This is the format of the class. You're gonna prepare before class. Class is gonna be used for interaction. Don't give it a name because it might affect people down the road if you don't do it as well. So when I talked about high impact practices, here are some of the things there. And I'll talk about some of these in more detail. Prior ability, one of the biggest dictators of future success. Go figure. What students know coming into a classroom, what students know coming into a program, the more they're going to learn. It takes knowledge to build more knowledge. So this is effect size up and down. So for educational intervention, effect size above 0.4 we think is pretty good, worthwhile doing. Large, so prior cognitibility. Second one, peer teaching, cooperative learning. Students teaching other students. I'm not talking about class presentations. I'm talking about students sitting on tables like this, explaining and talking to each other. So someone used the word team-based learning. If you don't know what team-based learning is, it is a method of kind of cooperative learning, peer teaching in a flipped classroom sort of setting. Students are discussing cases and coming to consensus on the cases and then reporting out the results using these little fancy books that I found in the back corner. Is the answer A? Is the answer B? So each team has a response. So you have to convince each other of what the answers are. And very quickly as an instructor, I can see where students are. And I'll show you what it looks like in a few slides. Providing feedback. Again, students need to know where they stand well and where they're kind of lagging behind. Without feedback, we're not going to get better. How can we use our assessments to get them feedback? Self-directed learning. This is a hard one because self-directed learning has a very certain definition. A lot of stuff we do is more self-paced than self-directed. Self-directed really means they're setting their own learning objectives, find their own resources to do this. It doesn't happen a whole lot in our curriculums because there's things they have to learn. We have 4 years or 2 years to get them to learn it. But self-paced learning has shown that one, it's more efficient. Students can spend time when they need to spend time and spend time where they don't need to spend time. And they can actually learn a little bit more than in other models like lecture. Questioning techniques, point 4, is asking questions in class, having quiz questions, clicker questions, other things that get them to retrieve information from memory. On the bottom is instructional media. We have decades of research around this. Some things it does well. It's great for helping build interaction. It's great for giving feedback very quickly. But not many things have some of these really big impact yet. Yep.
On the simulations that are listed under instructional media.
Yep.
So like in healthcare, we obviously kind of do like simulation-based learning, code or whatever. Is that included in that kind of?
So I think these simulations are probably more like virtual simulations than maybe the dummies that we tend to use, or especially now with better dummies. It depends on the situation and how many times we're doing it and other stuff like that. So a lot of the stuff comes from the part of education. So going back from the 70s of when people were watching videos and VHS tapes and other stuff. Well, and that's the thing now. Right now it is, we've shown that active learning does stuff. For now we have to, like, what is the cost effectiveness? How much time and effort do I need to do something for the effect I'm going to see? If I have to spend millions of dollars to see a small effect, is it really worth the time for something else I can do? So tip 7, getting students better prepared for class. So student preparation here. Flipped classroom is based on students preparing for class. They come in with some baseline knowledge. The problem is we've always been asked to do that. In high school, my teacher said, hey, read this book chapter before class. How many of us did it? One faculty member out of all of you. So students think we're really good students, that we were like straight A students in school. I'm like, dude, no. I got a D in my major. It got me out of my major. I was an ecology major. I wanted to study animal behavior. I want to go to Africa and study like meerkats. And I realized 2 things. 1, I never asked a question in any of my ecology classes. And 2, I don't like camping. I'm a little high maintenance. I like, showers and comfy beds. I was like, okay, I should switch to something else. Let me go to exercise physiology. So how to get students better prepared for class? So students' knowledge coming in, their intelligence coming in, big predictors. So some of the things that get me in trouble while doing faculty development workshops is I work for UNC Chapel Hill. We have some very bright students. School of Pharmacy, we get some very bright students. Most people don't need my help. They've been successful so far. I don't need to do much coaching for some of them. Some of them do need a lot of help. So when you get to places where you have students that maybe are less successful and require much more support, obviously it comes with more logistics of how do you get them more support. Student success things that you have on campus here, what do you do in classes, more help, office hours, other stuff. So this is one study that looked at things like IQ, SAT, verbal, and math. C is conscientious personality trait. And this other one is about prefrontal activity of your brain. And then AH2 is economics. Personality trait and prefrontal activity dictated academic success. Conscientious personality trait, so this comes from the big 5 personalities. Openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, introversion, agreeableness, and my favorite term of all, neuroticism. Conscientiousness really gets to organization. Students that are academically successful tend to be more organized, more thoughtful in their planning of their activities. My favorite one, neuroticism, is exactly what it says. Students that are much more emotional in their needs. A few years ago, I used to teach physiology, whole class. First exam was on a Friday. Monday, walk into class and the student goes, I've been hitting refresh on Blackboard all weekend. When are the grades going to be posted? I was like, this is like a 20-hour grading phenomenon. It's not going to be posted in the weekend. You need to chill. And there's a time for teaching, saying your instinct is to be emotional and kind of say, where's my results? I want it now. Take a step back, realize that we are people. I don't want to work 24/7 grading your stuff, or I don't want my TAs 24/7 grading stuff. So personalities, managing them in a classroom, teaching them how to manage themselves is something that we try to do a little bit, at least I try to do in my classes, of like, okay, if you have these personality traits, here's things that might be sticking points for you, especially doing small group stuff. So importance of brain activity and personality traits. So as an instructor, list all the ways you can get students to prepare before class, whether it's the medium you use or other activities. So how do you get students to come to class more knowledgeable? So if I give you 30 seconds to write down as many ideas as possible, see who wins, who gets the most amount of points, you get seconds on the food back there, or more dessert, or you get a to-go box. So 30 seconds, all the ways you can get students more knowledgeable coming into class. Ten more seconds. Three, two, one. Okay. So what are all the ways we can get students more knowledgeable coming into our classes? Okay, so you give them homework ahead of time and a pop quiz when they're in class? Okay. Hopefully over the homework that you gave them. The quiz is over the homework you gave them. Related, okay. So you're holding them accountable for hopefully doing something ahead of time. And for bonuses. Okay, so they're gaining stuff and not losing anything. Okay. So give them more structure to what you expect of them, and then hold them accountable with quizzes, other things people have done. What? Pray. Depending on what God you believe in, if any God at all, you pray that they do their work. You sacrifice the ones that don't. Once you sacrifice the first student, the rest will fall in line. Bribe them with chocolate, yep, or probably not the healthiest choice, but I guess dried fruit probably doesn't get much incentives. I have candy in my office, which students take, and I'm OCD enough to keep track of how much candy gets dispensed from my office. In 1 year, a couple years ago, 500 pounds of candy came out of my office. Which is good because they're pharmacy students, so when they have diabetes, they'll know how to treat it. And now she's giving me the answers. Okay, so we have some reading, videos, some quizzes, other things. Yep. Entrance slips, so you have to sign in order to walk in the door.
It's like exit slips, so they prepare for class and have to write down one thing that
Was that unclear?
they want to, they learn while preparing for class or whatever your objective is, and they walk in.
Okay, so they walk in with a question that they should have gathered ahead of time. Yep. Okay, so clickers hold accountable. Okay. Add some lead time. Oh, yeah, because students need time to prepare, because as faculty, we love when someone says, hey, can you get this to me tomorrow? You're like, no, it's Saturday, first of all. So there's lots of things we can do. So brainstorming is one way we can get classes engaged. So if you had tables like this or even a big classroom, what are all the ways we can do X, Y, and Z depending on your topic? You get a bunch of ideas. You can start a conversation around those ideas. So kind of like an entrance slip, get them to start thinking about stuff. You can do this online. You can do this in class. Now it doesn't work. That's okay. So here's my acronym to help out with pre-class preparation. R, have a reason. If you're asking students to prepare for class, there has to be a reason for you to do it. If you're simply going to go over exactly what they read ahead of time, you're going to lecture them over the stuff they read, don't do it. They're going to see it as a waste of time. I read this stuff, why are you lecturing to me on it? Class time needs to build upon it. You need to use it and focus on it versus simply repeating it. Accountability, students be held accountable for that preparation, either on a regular basis or through the randomization of like, you don't know when a quiz is coming, but a quiz is coming. I found out the hard way. I told the class, first of all, I have 150 students. I said, I'm gonna, instead of having 150 students 3 times a week, I'm gonna do 50 students once a week for like an hour and a half. Smaller group, better contact time. I'll do the same thing 3 times in a week, no problem. And I said, if you don't prepare for a class, you're going to come to class and you're going to be lost. You're adults, take responsibility for your learning. One day, 1 person out of 50 came to class. We had a great conversation. And I started asking students, I'm like, why? And they're like, first of all, just know that we love you, but every other class has stuff due and points associated with it. So 1, you get a lower priority. And 2, we come to class, we're lost, so why come to class? Like, those are very good points. And that's when I switched to team-based learning to kind of build in that accountability. Does it have to be a lot of points? Typically not. Part of the class grade, part of the expectations. You can drop certain grades. There's lots of ways you can do this. I would like to see one person one day make their course out of like 1,000,000 points and give like a 1-point assignment and see what students do it. The economy of grades. See at what point do students say it's not worth 1 point? The other thing I found out recently by talking to students is what you call something, regardless of points, dictates how much time they'll spend doing it. Anything called an exam, mini exam, step exam, trumps quiz, even though quiz might be more fractional points in the total grade. The psychology of learning what students think is important. So have a reason, hold them accountable, do things that help them interact with the material outside of class, just like you would do it in class. Someone uses homework assignment, you can use case studies. There is a process called just-in-time teaching. Just-in-time teaching gives them a conceptually challenging problem ahead of class. They have to use a reading material to solve the problem. They submit their answers through your learning management system. And kind of like the entrance slip idea, you're using their responses to dictate class time. So using their answers to say, here's good thinking, here's bad thinking, here's stuff I can fill in of why this answer is better or worse. It's anonymous, so students are not gonna get chastised for it, but they're much more engaged because it's their problems. I've done this with one of the talks that I used to teach, lithium pharmacokinetics. So lithium, a monitored drug. So if you get too high, it's toxic, too low, subtherapeutic. And the question came from one of our community pharmacy faculty was, someone calls your pharmacy, says they're on lithium, they work outside, they sweat a lot, and they feel on top of the world. They're so productive. They're shopping like mad. And the question is, I work outside, sweat a lot, so what's better, Gatorade or water? So the question to the students is this person, based on what they described, therapeutic, subtherapeutic, or toxic? And the reading material is about the kinetics of lithium. So lithium, cation, just like sodium, whatever sodium does, lithium does. So some students say, well, he's therapeutic, he's happy, he's productive, he's shopping. Because they haven't had that module yet on pharmacotherapy, what mania looks like. So lithium's used to treat bipolar disorder. So they're in a manic thing, they're shopping, they're hypersexual. It's like, that's not happiness, that's mania. So here's a little time for teaching. Students might say, okay, he's toxic because lithium follows sodium. He's sweating a lot, he's losing a lot of sodium. Body's trying to conserve sodium, so he's actually going to increase lithium reabsorption and get toxic. The time for teaching then is, here's the signs and symptoms of lithium toxicity. It's lethargy, coma, death. It's not hypersexual behavior. And finally, the other group of students says, well, he's probably subtherapeutic. He's probably drinking a lot of Gatorade, high salt content, and he's peeing out all the lithium, so he's actually becoming subtherapeutic. So to teach them how to balance clinical signs and symptoms with the kinetics of the drug and not make assumptions. So I can use that stuff to kind of illustrate, here's where you can correct their thinking. So it's one way to kind of build interaction to the stuff they're doing. Student friendly. A lot of stuff we do, primary literature, textbooks, are written by experts for other experts. These people are novices. They don't know the jargon. They get lost in the jargon. And once you get lost in the jargon, you give up. I tried to read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Anybody read that or tried to read that? Okay. I got through the preface. I'm like, nope, don't got it. I'll read the Cliff Notes or like Wikipedia. Because the jargon got to me. I spend my time in a cognitive psychology lab for lab meetings, and they're using terminology I've never heard before, or I've heard before, but I kind of know it. So I spend a lot of time catching up, and I feel really dumb about it too. Here are graduate students that are smarter than me. I have no idea what's going on. I have to spend more time looking up. So making videos, why students like lecture, you're taking a whole bunch of material, filtering out all the other stuff, and making it really straightforward for them, for better or worse. So I developed my own reading material, made videos and other stuff to at least get them to the point. And one of the students challenged me on this, like, well, aren't you dumbing it down for us? Like, well, that's just mean of you to say. And I said, I need you to learn jargon. I can teach you how to evaluate primary literature, but I need you to know the jargon first. So I'm scaffolding it. I need you to hear, I'll take you from here to here. They're like, okay, we can buy that. And then efficient. Students don't have all the time in the world, just like faculty don't have all the time in the world. So if you're giving them a book chapter to read that's 19 pages long with 1,000 words per page, which is standard textbook length, that's like 2.5 hours of reading. Not studying for the quiz you're going to give them, but simply reading the chapter. So what can you do that's efficient that they can learn the basic foundational stuff? This is a big challenge for our faculty in the past and currently. Oh, it's just an hour of video. It's an hour of watching a video, then another 2 hours to study the video for the quiz you're going to give them. And you want them to do that every class period. Not going to happen. 3 hours. If you have 3-credit class, they'll spend 3 hours a week on pre-class material. Pretty much what I found through some of our research. So 3 hours. So if you have 3 hours of student time to prepare before class, what's the best use of that time? 10-minute video is probably about an hour of them studying it. 10 pages of reading. When I first started as a faculty member, or actually as a postdoc at UNC, I went to the Center for Teaching and Learning. I said, I have to teach this topic on antidepressants, tricyclic antidepressants. I'm like, it's boring. I watched this VHS video of someone teaching it. It was 2 days. I was bored out of my skull. I fasted most of it. Like, give them a 2-page reading material of the basics. Give them a really hard quiz on it, true and false. If they get the question right, move on. If they got it wrong, that's the stuff you talk about. 15 years ago, that was called teaching. Now it's called flipped classroom. 3 learning objectives for describe, define, explain. Kind of the big things for pre-class preparation. You want them to know terminology. So when you say cardiac output, when you say genome or polymorphism, they know what those words mean. Class time shows them why it's important and how to use it. And then the problem we currently have and a lot of places have is students have a quiz every day in a class because you're asking them to prepare for every day for class. It's tiring. When students have 100 some odd quizzes in a semester, it's a lot of quizzes. And what happens when you assess too much, you start solving stuff. Here's this information, here's this information, here's this information. It's not connected at all. Some places do a better job at integrating assessments. Here are questions about this course, and this course, all combined in one big case. Here's the pharmacotherapy, here's the pharmacology, here's the pharmacokinetics of it. Excuse me. So if you do team-based learning, I'm not saying this is the end-all be-all of all teaching methods. It's one strategy out there. It starts with reading or pre-class preparation. Then it goes through a readiness assurance process. Students come into class, typically take an individual quiz. 10 questions, at least for me, 10 questions, multiple choice, single best correct answer. They submit that, they get in their team, same quiz, now as a team. They do some peer teaching. Oh, this answer is right, this answer is wrong, here's why it's right, here's where it's wrong. They do it on little scratch off things, if at things, so one form per group. They have to get it correct. And then they hand it in, appeals process, some corrective feedback, some maybe mini lecture to clarify any points. They have sufficient baseline knowledge to now do application. And they can apply it a few times. So class 1 might be really simple problems, class 2 is more complex. So one quiz for me might cover 3 class sessions. So it might be a lot of work up front, but then it's mostly application stuff at the end. So recommendations is assess where students are to 1, modify the class. If things are not going well or going well, you know what to do more of. Multiple choice questions, I can show you some data on why there's some good things at multiple choice questions. Pre-class learning is a great thing if you're going to utilize that knowledge to build upon it. If you are just going to do it just to do it, don't do it. Early on, students got very upset because it felt like we were doubling class time with no benefit because we were giving them content and then lecturing them with a whole new set of content. So we were doubling how much content in class and not actually making them go deeper into the content or probably not use it to solve problems. And you're going to have to assess pre-class learning. Tip 8 is the feedback tip. So you have to identify areas that are on target and pearls of how you can improve needing correction. Technology can do this really efficiently. Learning Blackboard, Sakai, whatever you use, Canvas can really help get feedback very efficiently. Why? So feedback, here's effect sizes on the far right. Again, anything over 0.4 is really good. Feedback cues, good. Punishment and praise, hey, that's really great. Not really helpful. Hey, you're really terrible at this. Not really helpful. And this punishment and praise can get to some of the things about student attitudes or accepting feedback. Who here has heard of things called fixed or growth mindset? So Carol Dweck has this theory a few years ago and become very popular now, fixed versus growth mindset, for a variety of things. So the basic idea is if you have a fixed mindset, you believe your intelligence is fixed. I was born smart. Mom said I was smart. Or an incremental growth one is with practice, I can get better at math. It's not dependent on, I was born this way, I can get better at it. People with a fixed mindset, I am not good at math. I'm not a good student. I'm a terrible person. They don't want feedback. Because if you tell me I'm good at math and I have been successful at math, and then you show me I'm wrong, that maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, that's a shot to my ego. And we do a lot of things in life to protect our egos. Versus a growth mindset, I take feedback as something like, oh, yeah, I don't like it, it makes me feel bad, but it's a way of me getting improved. So we're gonna have to deal with this view of their intelligence, and there's things we can do in the classroom to help reprogram some of this fixed mindset. Attribution theory is one of them. How do you attribute stuff based on effort? Now, some people might question this saying, well, that's sort of true, I'm not sure. I'm like, yes, with practice, I can get much better at basketball. Maybe I could play at college. Will it ever be Michael Jackson? Michael Jordan? Michael Jackson I can probably beat, maybe. But Michael Jordan just has physical characteristics, hand size, muscle architecture that I'll never have. I'll never be as good as Michael Jordan, but I get much better than I am with practice. So students can get better at math. They can get better at stuff with practice if they see the value in practice. So that's where feedback kind of gets difficult because some students don't want it because they take it personally. I can tell you I still take stuff personally. You get reviewers' comments back for a manuscript, you get very angry at the reviewers, like, why don't you understand this? Yep. Mm-hmm.
Is providing adequate feedback and then having that feedback then transfer to all the students to take it to the semester and then they get perfect grades. They have everything that I give them. So it's like, oh, here's some multiple choice or here's some short answer questions. I'll go ahead and give feedback to good answer for next semester. Oh, they pretty much copy and paste it. I don't know if anyone else has that problem, but it's something I've been noticing. Like, I don't get feedback when I also don't. Because I have students now they take a picture of every question, every exam, and then they'll come to my office and be like, on this question, great.
This is the never-ending discussion of, do you give back exams? Do you not give back exams? Like, no, because it's so hard to write really good questions. You give them back. I'm like, I can take pictures of it. If you got all students together, they can probably reproduce your exam with no problem. Has anybody found a solution to this? You never? Okay. Yeah, so you can have them generate the feedback or use reflection. So it's not necessarily here's the answers, like how well do you think you did, and where would you go for more help, and what generations would you kind of see afterwards?
I have exactly what I did was I separate questions. Some are practice quizzes, and then I created thousands of variations. And this is like have like 10,000 questions, but they're really small variations. And then those that we get return, and that's okay because there's so many, you cannot really do them all. And then I really release the exam where they function.
Yeah, so yeah, so it's a big problem for lots of people. So I think one, having the separate questions of here's practice versus here's exam stuff works out, but it helps having more experience and you have more questions to pull from. So I can do it, like for me, I teach math, so I can change scenarios and numbers pretty easily, but half-life is still a half-life question. If you can answer all 10 versions of my half-life question, I hopefully you understand understand that topic. Some people don't give back exams, but they have gallery walks of like, you can walk around like this and the exam is posted and like put your cell phones on the wall. All you can do is walk around, no notes and papers. You simply read, here's my explanation. So you know they're not coming away with anything. Kind of harder to do in an online class because stuff is there. ExamSoft, people have used that. And ExamSoft, you can tag questions. So they're getting bigger picture stuff like here's categories of questions, cell biology, molecular biology. So you don't see the individual questions, more of in this topic, you're struggling. So maybe here's where you get more help versus seeing the individual question. I don't do a whole lot of online teaching, so I can't say that here's one best method for do it. But my guess is somewhere on this campus might be someone that does it and kind of figured out, other than having a whole data bank of questions of like, here's practice, here's exam stuff. But with technology, you can screen capture everything, take pictures of everything. It gets much harder. And where's the will, there's a way to kind of figure out how to bypass the system. So it's not like drug testing. Athletes are not that dumb. They can beat most drug tests. Students can find ways to cheat. So if you have a great answer, please send it to him. But it's a problem that a lot of people have. And the other thing is immediate versus delaying feedback. Delaying feedback actually is better for certain things. By delay, I just mean it's not immediate. If it's behavioral, so a lot of things we think is immediate because Pavlov's dogs. Students are not necessarily dog-like. For knowledge, it's actually good to delay it because you have to think about what was I thinking about when I answered that question. So if I have an exam review an hour after or exam review the next day, it's close proximity where I'm still motivated and I can think back, what was my thought process during it versus the immediate feedback. So this just shows that feedback is better than not having feedback. And when you ask students what they prefer, immediate versus delayed, they want immediate feedback, even though delayed is better for them. So students surprisingly don't know what's best for them sometimes. So this is where, so even though they find it better, it's not, it's inferior for certain things. And this is what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, the unskilled and unaware. So when you get to things like time mismanagement. So what this curve shows is this line here, this nice diagonal line is their grade, so actual performance. These lines is predict your score in this exam. So the bottom students predict they get a 60 and they get a 20. It's what we call overconfident. Their prediction's much higher than their actual score. Better students are better calibrated. They're predicting scores that are pretty close vicinity of their actual score. So this is what we call metacognition, the monitoring or thinking about your own thinking. So when it comes to time management issues, or even value of assignments, so time management is, I'm not real good at regulating my own behavior, and things seem much easier on paper. I'm gonna look up the journal article the night before. I'm gonna go 30 minutes before the assignment's due. I'm like, I got this, I can bang it out in 30 minutes. And 3 hours later, you realize I'm still working on it. So there are things we could do, time logs, practice exercises, to get a better idea of how much time it takes to do something to a good degree. So maybe they do it the first time and screw it up, and then they get feedback on saying, okay, how'd you handle this assignment? They're like, well, I waited to the last minute, and you did poorly. Next time, you're going to not wait to the last minute. So my colleagues across campus do this with exams. So if you're going to challenge and ask for points back, you have to fill out this 2-page thing. Did you come to class? Did you do the homework? Did you go to office hours? Did you do X, Y, and Z? If you answered no to any of these, don't ask for points back. You didn't do what you needed to do. It saves herself some headaches. So it gets them metacognitively aware of what it takes to be successful. So students struggle to make judgment about their assessments. They don't have enough data. So to making sure your assessments are meaningful, they are measuring what you want them to measure. So you need to stage tasks so the students are making mistakes before that high stakes assessment. It's better to fail in the classroom than out in real life, on their jobs, in patient care situations. Students need to act on stuff immediately after learning it. Otherwise, you end up with a situation of like, oh yeah, I think I know that. And you walk out of the classroom and the next day you're like, oh, I don't remember anything. You ever asked the class, do you understand this? And the response is, don't ask that. Ask them to show you. Clicker questions are one way to do it. Cases are another way to do it. So have them act on information immediately. And then coaching them, stuff that's constructive, goal-oriented. So some colleagues and I realized that not a lot of faculty might come to things like this for an hour or longer. So we developed a 5-minute university, kind of borrowing from said Guido Sarducci. So right now we have about 24 videos that are 5-minute universities, 5 minutes on a topic. So I'll show you a snippet of one based on the time and to show you what, so this would be for feedback.
Residents and peers. This presentation is brought to you by Sina Haynes from the University of Mississippi. Feedback is an ongoing process, a formative one that conveys non-judgmental information that helps the learner build on a foundation of skills and behaviors. Effective feedback helps the learner assess their performance in order to identify areas for retention and areas to improve. Giving formative feedback can be a useful teaching tool. Some suggested reflective questions to guide the feedback process can include: what went well during the learning process? And what are some areas for improvement? So how do we give effective feedback? A neutral and private.
So it's 5 minutes on one topic. If you want access to these, send me an email, or I can send them to Julie and she can distribute out. It's self-paced. The only thing we ask is you fill out surveys saying whether you like these things or you find them helpful or not. So it's one giant research study. But there's topics here like feedback, what things went well. So part of it is helping them with that metacognition, their ability to judge what they know and don't know. What do you think went well? Sometimes they're much harder on themselves than you might be on them. We see it a lot in experiential education, probably more than the classroom stuff. So there's lots of things we can do to help give them feedback. And then each video also has a handout, because we all love handouts, that kind of summarizes the major points. So recommendations: feedback should be specific, timely, and actionable. What'd you do right or wrong? Why is it right or wrong? And where can you get more help if needed? So maybe instead of giving them the exemplar answers, maybe some probing questions of like, what do you think, did you consider X, Y, and Z? So they don't necessarily have the answers. Technology can give answers very quickly to a lot of people, or having debriefing sessions on exams. So making exams learning tools as well as assessment tools. This is especially true for large classes where it's harder to get feedback to 100 students or 70 students, especially if there's common questions. I try to put these things on discussion boards so all students can see the questions being asked, but discussion boards are really also hard to manage, at least in my experience. Peer teaching, we talked about some of this as well. Peer teaching requires a few things. One, interdependence. One person can't do it on their own. If they can, it's not going to work out for a very good group project. Individual accountability, so everybody's accountable for their own work. Promotes interaction, either face-to-face or online. Requires collaborative skills and group processing. So the three circles here. So think, pair, share. A very easy collaborative group technique. First part is think. Individual work first. It's not a pair share, it's a think, pair, share. Think or write a response to a group, to a question. What is the one best place to go if you're visiting Tyler, Texas? Write down responses. Individually, don't talk to your neighbors. Second part, small group work, pair with the person next to you, talk to your table, compare answers. If you are an introvert, someone like me, I'm a very strong introvert. Don't get me wrong, some of my best friends are people, but I'd rather not be around people. I need to think before I speak. I'm not an extrovert where just people just like splat things out and hope it ends at some point. So for the introverts, it works out well. I get to think, write a response. For the shy or timid who don't want to participate in class, I have time to think, and I get a bunch of other people's responses too, so I can compare like, okay, my idea is not that bad, or it's much better than their ideas. I'm willing to share it. And for the unprepared, another reason why people don't participate in class, oh, okay, I really should prepare because I feel like an idiot because I don't do anything in class. And then once you do individual work, small group stuff, then the whole class discussion. What do you have a bunch of answers for? And that helps get things started. So I think pair share can use to initiate conversation or to end a conversation. So there's a whole continuum of these things, from think, pair, share, really simple, do it on the fly, round table, 3-step interviews, send a problem, jigsaws, all things require much more planning, and maybe bigger groups depending on the task. And then semester-long things like case-based learning, team-based learning, problem-based learning, much more complex, requires much more management to kind of do. And you can Google some of these things. Again, another thing that one of those stupid ideas of driving to work of like, hey, people like having pocket guides. So we developed like a quick pocket guide, evidence-based guide about if you want to use clickers, here's how to use clickers, and here's the evidence behind why clickers work. So some of these things are in there, or like Tom Angelo has a book on classroom assessment techniques. Elizabeth Barkley has another book about collaborative learning techniques, which is very recipe-like. Here's how you do a jigsaw. Here's how you do a think, pair, share. Here's how you do a muddiest point. So this is the evidence about it. So effect sizes on the x-axis, frequency of people on the y-axis. Again, lots of positive results that peer teaching is beneficial to student learning. And the reason why is here's how memory happens. Your environment has a lot of stimuli around it. You filter out stuff that you think is unimportant. It goes into long-term memory, and I have to pull it out to use it. So talking to people, I actually have to think about what I'm learning. If you ask students what's harder, taking an exam or teaching someone else, what's the answer? Teaching somebody else. I learned more about my discipline by teaching it than I did by taking a test. So if I have to teach others, I really have to know it pretty well. So it might take more upfront time. The more activity you do in class, the more debriefing you need. Students need that structure of like, okay, that was great, but what's my take-home points? What should I have gotten out of this? We tend to rush activities because we feel like we're running out of time, and keep individuals accountable. And the last one, testing as a learning tool. We use tests to make grades. So when we use a test, we use tests to give feedback. So summative versus formative assessment. There are other things we can do with tests. So we spend a lot of time getting things into our brain, but not a lot of things getting it out of the brain. So this is one of the classic studies on what's called the testing effect. People read an SAT or a GRE-like passage. They studied it, and they were given a test on it, and they got 11%. Next group, they studied it, took a practice test with no feedback, learning increased threefold by the simple act of retrieving information. If you give immediate feedback, it goes up more. If you give up delayed feedback, even more. So if you can retrieve information, it helps consolidate that learning. I pull it out of my brain, I work with it, I play with it in my working memory, it goes back into long-term storage. I now have new links to that information. So the more times I use it, my active learning works, the more times I use it and play with it and utilize it to solve a problem, the stronger that memory becomes, the better it's more ingrained in my head. So if you're doing it once and never seeing it ever again, it's not going to be there for very long. So we can use clickers for this. So far, clickers don't show great evidence for student learning. It's great for attention and motivation. Maybe because we're using clickers wrong for that. Instead of asking questions that day, maybe the next class we ask questions about the previous class. Help them retrieve information from prior classes. Because when students are done with stuff, they take an exam like, I don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. But it's not true. Hopefully it's not true. In-class quizzes, retrieval as a study strategy, brain dumps, write down everything you want to do. One of the students was an hour before his exam, was like, what should I do? Should I reread all my notes? I'm like, just write everything down you know. He did that, came back like, I got like a 90-something on the test. I'm gonna do it every time. Like, okay, we'll study more in first place. But things you can do. Asking questions in class, all of us probably do it to some degree. Most of us, so this was from medical faculty, percent of instructors that answered their own questions or didn't answer their questions. So the students answered the questions 30% of the time. The instructor ignored the answers the rest of the time. What do you think this means? No answers? Okay, we're moving on. Expected wait time. Assistant and associate professors wait a full 10 seconds. He said, I wait 10 seconds before I answer. Full professors say, I got places to go. I'll give them 5. The actual wait time, under 3 seconds. Why do you think this is? 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. No responses? Okay, we're moving on. I had a colleague wait 20 minutes once. He sat down, opened a newspaper, said, this is your time. I'll move on when you answer the question. If you wait at least 3 to 5, I count to 30. Think about it from the student's perspective. Do I know the answer? I need to think about the answer. Do I want to answer the question? I'm going to wait for the person in the front row who always answers all the questions to go first, and then they'll take care of me. So there's a lot of things that go on. So waiting 30 seconds or doing a think, pair, share is an activity where they have to write a response first, much more effective in getting them to participate than that. So large classes, when you think about participation, 70 to 100, how are you determining participation? Is them physically talking in class what you want for participation, or you want them to be mentally engaged? There's a difference. If they're all engaged in doing stuff, that's participation for me, because it's hard to get everybody to speak in 100 students. Turning in assignments at the end, like Muddy's point, was the hardest part of today. It was unclear that I can fix next time. Turning things in holds them accountable for it, shows they're participating, because when you get to large classes, you know, I have faculty that have a pickle jar that pull out names, and once you're answered, you pull out the side. So if you answer the question on day one, you're good for the rest of the semester, because there's 150 students to ask questions to. So how are you judging participation? If you're doing small group stuff, if your group size is too big, people can hide. So, and we will. Why should I put in effort when the rest of the work gets done? Which is why all of our high achieving students hate group work, because they carry the group. So you have to make smaller groups to make sure that people can't hide. And then this idea of transfer appropriate processing, which I kind of mentioned before. This was a this was actually, we were asked to help with the School of Dentistry. They were a lecture-based class, pharmacology, how drugs work. We said, well, let's introduce some clinical pearls, the application of these drugs. So if the students were lectured, so the bottom is method acquisition, so lecture versus this clinical pearl or medication minute. Then the assessment, so if they were lectured to and they took a knowledge test, they did pretty well. They got like 75% on this quiz. If they took the application test and we lectured them, they did much worse. Again, it's harder to apply stuff if you simply know knowledge. If we taught them the application, both knowledge and application go up. It's easier to go down Bloom's taxonomy, going from application to knowledge, than going up Bloom's taxonomy. So if you expect students can automatically apply things if you give them the right knowledge, you're incorrect. If you want them to apply stuff, you have to show them how to apply stuff. So the first way to really look at this, from the 70s, the quality and durability of memory is appropriate for the way it was learned and how it's tested. So if you are testing things that students never had an opportunity to practice or see before, are you really measuring if student learning happened? If I said, please list the calendar months in order, how many of you can do that pretty easily? January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Okay, you know it pretty well. Let's do it alphabetically. First one? April. Okay, so one wrong already. April. So April, August, December, February, March. So we're really slow at this. What about June or July? We learn it in a certain way. If we're asked to recall it in a certain way, we're really good at it. So if you teach them knowledge but ask them something completely different, they're going to struggle with it, just like we're struggling with it. If you want them to know it in alphabetical order, then help them learn it in alphabetical order. Give them practice in alphabetical order. Why do you think police officers ask you to count backwards by sevens, or do it because it's, I can sing the alphabet, but doing like every other letter, I was like, there's no way I can do it, and I'm sober. So your assessments really need to line up with, one, what is the ultimate application of it? Do I find it meaningful? And that's really hard because students find different meaning in different things, which is why we have science writing for biology majors versus writing for English majors. Why we have organic chemistry for non-chemists, to try to make it more meaningful for everyday application compared to what a chemist values versus what a non-chemist values might be completely different things. So the beauty of you being an expert is you might know what the future application might be. Better yet, asking students, what do you think this application could be? The other part, the beauty of assessments, is dealing with an issue of how well something is stored. So storage strength versus how easy it is to retrieve. If I ask you your ATM password, don't shout it out. Unless you know the digits with it, then please shout it out. I got a marker. You can spit it like that. You've done it so many times, it's really easy to do. Your phone number might be much harder because, well, who knows your phone number anymore? You have cell phones that know everything. So that's knowledge, marginal knowledge. What was your childhood friend's phone number? You probably don't know it, probably can't recall it. If some of you might be able to, but if I showed it to you, you're like, oh yeah, that's it. So you get the tip of the tongue state. I think it started with a 9, there was a couple 7s in there. But if you saw it, you're like, yeah, that's it. Cram knowledge, what'd you have for dinner last night? You can probably tell me now, and a week from now, you're like, I have no idea. Last night, I think I had a Cobb salad. And then unlearned material is not stored well, it's not retrievable. I never learned it before. What's my Twitter handle? I don't know. So if you get the so this is a study we conducted. We asked them, so first day of class for physiology, here's a fill in the blank test on stuff you probably learned as an undergraduate. By the way, students don't like fill in the blank questions, especially the first day of class. Some of the students actually wrote, if this was multiple choice, I would have got it right. So if they got the fill in the blank correct versus incorrect, and then if they got the fill in the blank incorrect, and we showed them the multiple choice version. So this is performance on the final exam. So 3 weeks after this intervention, if they simply saw the word they were looking for, there was enough to reactivate this marginal knowledge, the stuff that's stored well but not retrievable, for 3 weeks. So instead of me reteaching the topic, I can give them a multiple choice question. If the correct answer is there, oh, bilirubin, I was looking for the word bilirubin. I can remember it for long periods of time and reactivate that once known information. So here's an example of taking stuff from psychology and helping make teaching more efficient. Instead of reteaching it, I can maybe give a multiple choice test to reactivate knowledge. Because we get tired of asking students, do you remember this from last semester? They're like, yeah. Okay, show me you do. Oh, I was joking. Especially if you teach the same class. You're like, remember we did this last semester? You're like, no, we didn't. I'm like, dude, I was there. We talked about this. I have it on a recorded lecture that we talked about this. So from the student's point of view, the most important thing is your exams. That's what tells them what's important and what's not important. So if your exams are nitpicky details that are not major concepts, it tells them, okay, I need to memorize nitpicky details from your slides. So again, that determines their grade. They are grade driven. That's the most important thing to them. So what message are your exams saying to the students about what you find value in? You find value in details or really knowing the really basic concepts, being able to apply them to a high level. I'm not saying this is all knowledge-based, but you can teach them how to apply stuff and be that as a standard versus simply knowing stuff. So in your handouts also the American Institute of Higher Education 9 Principles of Assessment. All the things they value in assessment. So here's a few snippets of that. Student learning begins with educational values. What do you value? If you value problem solving and thinking, your assessments need to do this. If you value knowledge and memorization, then your exams will do that as well. Assessments are most effective when it reflects understanding of learning in a variety of ways. Integrating topics. Okay, there's a big movement now. Purdue does it, UNC does it, integrating STEM courses. Math, science, chemistry, even doing more arts, humanities, and science. To making sure things are integrated, it leads to better learning. Assessment requires attention of outcomes, but equally to the experience of those outcomes. What are we doing in the classroom that leads to those things? And for us, it's a decade of assessment or lifetime assessment, because that's what accrediting bodies are looking for, to show that you're doing quality stuff. State funding showing you're doing quality stuff. So if your assessments aren't where they need to be, it's one of the first things you probably have to fix to making sure they are valid and reliable, that they're meaningful, measuring things you think they're measuring. A lot of times our assessments are the last things we make. Oh, the final exam is next week. I got to write a final exam. For me now, the final exam is written before classes start. I know exactly what they should get out of my class. I know what they should learn to help them in other classes. That exam's written, and yes, I am teaching to the test, because that's the measure of what I need students to know. It's not a low bar. It's like, here's the stuff you need to know. I'm going to help you achieve that goal. If you fail, it's not because I didn't try really, really hard to get you there. It's because you simply may not understand the material to the ability you need to. So my recommendations for testing: pre-course, before they walk in the door, multiple choice. 1, to reactivate any prior knowledge which might be necessary for that course. Is organic chemistry 2, organic chemistry 1 concepts. If it's music theory, maybe basics about music. And you can assess a lot of information very quickly. 20 seconds a question, you know what you don't know about knowledge stuff. I can go through large sampling very quickly. And it might give you some sense, like they're really good overall in this area. There are a few stragglers here. They're really poor in this area, so maybe I need to change class to focus more on this area than maybe this area. So you can use this to maybe design some of your class stuff on the fly. Pre-class learning, multiple choice. Again, you can reactivate some marginal knowledge or maybe fill in the blank to say, I want you to really put an effort to retrieve the information. Holds them accountable for future learning. This can be cases, it can be quizzes. Within class, delay testing. So giving audience response systems is nice during class, keeps them engaged, gives you a quick idea if they're paying attention to you or not. Repeat the questions the next day, or some variation of it, and see like, okay, what do you remember from last class period? If it's low, then maybe some homework assignments might be necessary to get them to relearn stuff. So provides feedback and increases retention through testing effect. And then exams, format may be less important. It's a little bit easier to go from fill in the blank and essays to multiple choice. So if you're giving practice tests, I typically have practice tests that are open-ended and exams that are multiple choice because it's much easier to grade. And then give them some sort of feedback. Overall, here's how you're performing. Here's your areas of weaknesses. Here's your areas of strength. Here's where you get more help with some of this stuff. So open-ended questions are probably good for learning. Avoid knowledge questions from instructions, too easy. Retrieval, testing effect works because you need some forgetting to happen. It has to be a difficulty. Teach towards application. And then for me, I'm a big advocate of cumulative testing. If it's really important, it shouldn't be a one and done. This is regardless of discipline. If it's really important stuff, you want them to learn it, then it probably should be in every test, or going back to other stuff over time, whether it's biology, history. So that's a lot of stuff in a very short period of time. So a nice way to end class is ask these 4 questions. What one thing did you find most important or learn during activity? 2, why do you believe it's important? Make them make the connections of why it's meaningful. This way, I don't have to tell them it. They have to discover it for themselves. Even in my math class, I had students do reflective writing. Why do you think this is important to your life? And students will write, my mom or grandmother was on IV infusions. I saw issues that happened, so this is why it's important to me. Apply what you learned to activity to some aspect of your life. How can you use solubility in your everyday life? Try putting sugar into unsweetened tea when it's cold. How do you fix that? You make a simple syrup and you can pour it in and it works perfectly fine. And then what questions have to raise you? What other questions do you have? If you submit these to me, then I know what other questions you have, what your issues might be. And if you do this on a regular basis, this one study found an effect size of 0.5. Pretty good effect for simply asking 4 questions, which takes a couple minutes at the end of class. Because it makes them think about what is meaningful. How do I integrate this to other classes that I'm taking? And you can be much more explicit. Rate this to your science classes, rate this to your art classes, religion classes, your everyday life. And then some of the feedback you might get rid of some of this expert bias. If you're trying to teach thinking, the hardest thing for us as experts is we skip steps because it's so easy for us. And students are like, how do you get from point A to point B? Like, oh, there was like all these steps in between. So slowing our own brain down, it's really hard. But if you want students to think, you have to slow your brain down, and even being very intentional. Write down the steps of the process. Don't actually do it, but what are you doing first? What are you doing second? What are you doing third? The expert does the same thing. They can compare their version versus the expert's version and see, okay, here's the order I did things. Here's how an expert did it. Where are the differences and why is their method better than our method? Team-based learning can do some of this stuff because you're walking through the answers of why it's correct or incorrect. They can see how you rationalize through this problem. Conditions that slow learning, better outcomes, retrieval practice, spacing, quizzes over time, interleaving. I'm going to study biology, then I'm going to study art, then I'm going to test biology, then test art. Or reducing or delaying feedback, make them work harder for those answers. And again, there's no magic formula. It depends on who your learners are, where they're starting from, who you are as an instructor. I am not real good at Socratic discussion. I like much more structure to my classes. I like case studies, like team-based learning. What you need to do, if you need them to apply stuff, they should apply stuff. If you don't need them to apply stuff, don't have them apply stuff in the content that you have. So there is no one easy answer. I would love if there was, but this is why faculty developers have jobs. And there's so many opportunities to learn about this stuff. Some of you in your professional meetings might have teaching parts of it. You have resources on this campus. Feel really lucky that you have people on campus to help you. The Lilly conferences are a great place. The other one is teaching professor conferences. Teaching professors only happens once. Bigger group Lilly conferences happen all over the country. So there's one in Austin, Texas in early January. It's all disciplines coming in to talk about teaching. So it's nice to be around people that are dedicated teachers and get excited about that stuff. So all through the country, there's the website. I've been going since I was a wee faculty member. It's a great place to present data, learn from others. And I know there's lots of questions up here, which we kind of touched on, but if there's anything I can do to be helpful now or in the future, feel free to call me, email me, whatever you want. I'd be more than happy to answer questions. Again, I may not have answers to everything, but I can point you in the right direction of people who do. My website has some more details there, some resources. But again, if you want access to like the 5-minute videos, you can email me. But I know we're probably way over time. But if there's stuff you want questions answered, I'd be more than happy to hang out for whatever time you want to kind of talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about. Or if any one of these questions you really want. This one, reliability, validity, statistics, difficulty versus discrimination index. It's really boring stuff, which is why I don't like talking about it. Integration, we all struggle with it. I haven't seen a real great solution to it. And the question is, what do you mean by integration? Is it in time, in space? Or is it always going back to things and making linkages for students? A lot of schools try to integrate it within the same course. Here's medchem, here's pathophysiology, here's that. That's one model. I don't know if any data says that's the best model versus making sure that pharmacotherapy is always relating back to basic sciences and making sure basic sciences is predicting pharmacotherapy. For our curriculum, even our basic science courses should have a patient at the end of every class period. Here's why the Krebs cycle is important, because it relates directly to diabetes. So students see the relative, why it's important for them to know. There's a bunch of other stuff there. Value of assignments really comes down to meaning and why they think it's important. So are there other questions, things that, clarity, things you want to know? It's Friday, you want to go home. Yes, sir.
Level application, different level of class, and let's say freshman versus upper freshman.
So I work in a professional program, so I deal with mostly first-year students, but we do have scaffolding of problems. So for our curriculum, early problems and early courses are much more straightforward, like one disease state. Today, we're gonna do hypertension. Then we'll do diabetes. As classes, next round of classes, we'll do, okay, now you have a realer patient who has both diabetes and hypertension. So we're building the complexity over time. One, it helps students go back to relearn stuff. And two, it helps them start to integrate this stuff. If you start with things way too integrated or way too high level to begin with, it's way too much cognitive energy for them and they kind of lose sight of the smaller pieces. So we're trying to scaffold it. So it's, here's a little bit of information, apply it. We're going to add on some more information, apply it, add on more information. So by the end, you're solving more realistic problems. Harder to do in classes which are much more siloed, maybe biology curriculum, like, okay, what are you doing in ecology versus molecular biology versus genetics versus upper level classes? Because you really have to know what's coming down the line. What problems are people solving? Curriculum maps help with that, so you kind of know where things are. But more or less, you get faculty around the table and say, what are you guys doing in your classes and how can we work together to kind of solve bigger problems? Which trying to get faculty around the table to do these conversations is not the easiest thing at times. But we do it. I don't know about undergraduate colleagues whether they do it within biology or chemistry. Pharmacy and health professions a little easier because we're a confined curriculum. We're manageable within one school. We talk to each other to some degree, so it's a little easier to manage it in our school than maybe across departments or within bigger departments. But we try to do it as much as possible. So for our curriculum, so early on, it's we do, I sit by your side, I help you through problems. Over time, take away that support, so at the end, they're independent learners. And it's class, then experience, and class and experience, thinking about like, okay, here's some stuff, go out and apply it, learn some new stuff, come back, we'll talk about it, teach you some new stuff. So it ends up being this scaffolded process where they're supported early on, and over the course of a course and even the curriculum, we take away some of that support so they're more and more independent. Much harder to do. So within a course, it's a little bit, you can do it to some degree. A curriculum is much easier to kind of take away that support. So early on lecture, and then team-based learning, and then problem-based learning because it's a much messier problem to take away some of that support where they're finding their own resources and solving bigger problems. That's kind of how we try to measure that or reinforce that bigger problem solving process. Not that easy. A lot of coordination. You're welcome. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. how to keep morale in the classroom. For me, it comes down to borrowing some stuff from leadership books while having early successes. So my course now is, we're going to do some stuff, really foundational stuff. I'm going to give you an exam, which hopefully is very foundational to make sure that you know basic stuff, that I know you know basic stuff. Pretty high success rate. It's like, okay, you feel like you can start doing this. Next thing is like, okay, so that's the really foundational stuff. Next section of material is a little bit harder. The students still do well, but you start seeing people at the bottom tail start dropping down. Most people can handle it, but then you start seeing this differentiation, either because they don't understand the topic or mid-semester classes going nuts and then they have so many other things going on. But I can identify those people earlier, so you're not getting punished for not knowing stuff. The new stuff is low stakes. The cumulative stuff is higher stakes, and we did it once, you should know it by now. So if you get it, okay, great, I still remember the stuff, new stuff I'm still struggling with, but it's not gonna punish me. And I know failing stuff is not gonna be the end of it because I have so many opportunities to do well. And those students I can reach out to and saying, hey, do you need help? There are things going on, I can do it. Half the students respond saying, yes, I'm kind of upset, half of them ignore me. Can't do anything with people that ignore me. Third one is basically like, here is something close to your final exam. It's about 3 weeks away. Your final exam is 3 weeks away. Where are you now? What areas do you need to do? So it's those small successes that help them get there. And one of the students said in a course evaluation, like halfway through the semester, they hated my guts. They thought this was awful. They felt so confused and so frustrated because at that point, they have all the material more or less. They're struggling with things like hepatic clearance and renal clearance, all this other stuff. What equation do I use and when do I use it? And then it's just more practice. And at some point, this bell happens of like, oh, it finally makes sense to me. So like, I don't know why it works, but tell students, one, they'll hate you halfway through the semester, but give them 3 weeks, they'll be much better. So I think that's for the harder stuff. I think building that early success and have them practice without feeling punished, because they're stressing about exams and quizzes and every little point. You know, like my class is basically a bunch of little pass-fail assignments. You need to get 85% on your little mini exams, you need 85% on your quizzes, you need 85% on your peer evaluation. So there's wiggle room for you to make errors. And all you gotta do is pass the section. The final exam is my major determinant. It's like, this is my one measure of independent work that you actually remember stuff from way back when. So for me, the pass-fail grading, because no matter what I do, there's focus on points. So how do I remove points as a factor, either a positive or a negative deterrent? So I think I've been successful. I am not the most hated class in the curriculum, which is my goal as an instructor when I first started. Like, how do I make this course? You know, I've won teaching awards from teaching kinetics. So students understand that I'm there for them. I'm there to support them as much as I can. I think that helps some. But at the end of the day, I'm like, it's up to them. I learned this material. A lot of my course evaluations say, or some of my course evaluations say, you didn't do anything. I had to teach myself everything. Like, it makes me happy and sad at the same time. It's like, yes, but someone wrote your book, someone designed all your exams, someone designed the course. At the end of the day, it is your job to learn this stuff. I already learned it. I can only do so much. I had to put you in a position to be successful. And as long as they feel supported in that, I think they're willing to take the risk for me. Other courses, I don't see that because, like, okay, hematology, oncology, really hard, really stuff like, sorry, you don't know the third line treatment for AML, you're out. Like, well, why would a pharmacist need to know that unless you're a hematology oncology to begin with? So I think that those early successes really do help out. And knowing that I am not a mean, terrible person. And I have candy in my office and tissues and a couch. Well, we can try.
So like, you know, the practice.
Mhm.
So how do you keep those people that already got it
Yeah.
And hating my guts.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a great answer for that.
I mean, I feel like kinetics would be a good example of the struggle of that too, because I know some people get it right off the bat and others.
Yeah, so at least a few things that might be helpful. The hardest thing for me is if someone has a question in class, I don't know if that represents the entire class or that specific person. So I spend time answering that question and be like, dude, just leave that person alone because it's their problem, not everybody else. But I can't make that assumption unless I have some other information. So for the higher level students,